Welcome to the How Soccer Explains Leadership podcast, where we explore leadership principles through the lens of the beautiful game. Here are your hosts, Phil Dark and Ryan North.
Welcome back to How Soccer Explains Leadership. We're very excited here today. We have our first interview of the show, which I'm really excited today to have Paul Jobson with Baylor Women's Soccer. He's the head coach of that team. Paul, how you doing today?
Doing great, Phil. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, we're excited. I know Ryan really wishes he could be here. Unfortunately, as we talked about in the first episode, he had an issue with his foot. That has actually taken a turn where he's dealing with that still. So as we talked about in episode 1, we're going to have to pivot, which is both part of soccer, part of leadership, and part of this podcast, apparently. So, Paul, you know, a lot of people out there, I mean, some people listening presumably know you, but I know there's a lot of people who probably have not heard of you. Believe it or not, Paul, there are people out there who haven't heard of you.
Probably a lot, Phil.
It very well may be a lot. I'm not going to make any estimates on the numbers, but I would love for you to just briefly share your story with the audience, kind of how you got involved in where you are today, and really what the kind of intersection you have between soccer and leadership.
Yeah, sure, Phil. I appreciate that. And I think what's cool about this line of work is that everybody I talk to seems to have a different story of how they got into coaching. And you just assume as a kid that every coach grows up and wants to be a coach. I did not, to be quite honest with you. I thought I would grow up and take over my dad's family business. My brother was going to be the coach in life, and God has other plans for sure. But looking back, I couldn't imagine doing anything different. Grew up in a great home. Older brother, older sister, both great leaders. Christian home. Mom and dad were great in the community. Mom was a choir director. Dad owned his own business. Dad was my first coach. So I learned a lot of leadership from him through his business and through coaching. Through high school, I was a student body president for 4 years, led that way. And then right before college, before I went to play college at play soccer at Presbyterian College for Ralph Polson, which probably more people know him than know me. But my dad passed away right before I left. And that was a pivotal moment for me. Great leader, great dad, great friend. And the world was turned upside down for sure. So questions running through my mind and whatnot. Leadership took a backseat big time for me during that time. But through mentors like my coach, taught me, what it meant to be a coach, introduced me to a young team and said, hey, if you don't coach this team, these young kids won't be able to play soccer. So I was like, oh man, okay. Suckered me into that and fell in love with the game again, not just as a player, but as a coach, and learned a ton through that experience. I coached a team. They were age range was 7 to 12, and they were boys and girls. And we played in a U12 boys league about 45 minutes down the road. So I learned a lot about navigating personalities, age groups, family dynamics on that first team. And I always thought coaching would be a hobby. Loved it, but it was going to be a hobby. So again, God takes control of that and introduced me to my wife in Atlanta. She was playing for the Atlanta Beat of the now defunct WSA, the first women's pro league. We were friends, then we dated, then we got married. And then, as everybody says, don't get married, change jobs, and move all at the same time. We did all three. We got married. We moved to Northern Illinois University outside of Chicago and became the head and assistant coach for NIU's women's soccer team. She was the head coach and I was the assistant. At the same time, she got called into the women's national team for the first time at 31, I guess. So I kind of took over the team from there while she was gone. There for 3 years, now Baylor for 13. So a guy who never thought I would be a professional coach, so to speak, has been thrown into it, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I absolutely love it. Love the engagement you have with players, and I've learned so much through coaching soccer.
Yeah, now you also, Marci is your wife, is also teaching your children and some others as well right now. Yeah, she's leading some little. They're probably not little bears. They're probably little something else. But you have your camps that you do that. But tell me a little bit about your family.
So we've been blessed with 4 boys since we've been here in Waco. They are 11, 8, 6, and 3, and they are just obviously the joy of our lives. And as our children started getting older, Marci and I were coaching together here and realized other people were raising our children. So we took some steps back, and she kind of phased herself out of the program, off staff, to mentor our young children, and coaching 3 of them right now in the recreational leagues, and just mentoring young people become a new passion of hers. Younger people, she's always mentored,
Yes.
college and up, but the younger kids has become a new passion of hers that God's put on her heart, and been really fun to watch that, and really more fun for our alumni to see her coaching and realizing she coaches the 6, 8, and 11-year-olds the same way she coached our college kids. So
Right.
it's awesome.
That is fantastic. And what's cool about this is I'm finding out more and more about our overlap of our lives. When we met, it was actually my daughter was visiting Baylor, and we got to meet that way. But we overlapped in Atlanta. My wife was the chaplain of that Atlanta Beat team, and that's how we got to know Marci, which was fun. But you and I never met there. You're, I believe, youth pastor? Brett Armstrong was the man that I coached with in Nashville when I was in law school.
Yep.
So I forget what
Yep.
his connection with you was, but we found that one out pretty quickly.
Yeah, Brett and I, our families grew up in the same little church just outside of Atlanta. So our families are intertwined back through our parents before we were probably born, each of us.
That's so cool. Yeah. So Brett and I, we mentioned that team that I coached in Nashville that won the first state championship for Christ Presbyterian Academy. And so that's fun. So it's just been cool. And then to find out the whole Beat connection, I saw on social media, one of the playing cards from her Beat days. And I didn't realize you were there at the same time until just checking that stuff out. So that's fun too.
Yeah, the soccer world we talk about is so huge, but at the same time, it's so small. Just the how it and even through this, you and I realizing there's other connections that we have through some other future guests you're probably going to have that we didn't realize we both knew. And it's fun connecting the dots and seeing how we all intertwine a bit through this crazy game.
Yeah, absolutely. And the hope is that as we learn these things, these, degrees of separation will become smaller and smaller and smaller, and we'll hear these connections and people can connect through the show. I know other podcasts that I do, that's happened, and people have done different things just by connecting with people as they heard a podcast interview or something else. And I really hope that's the case as well. Hopefully you get some future players out of this. I mean, who knows? I mean, that's not why you're doing it, but my hope is that people hear about what I saw. And it was what I was getting at when I watched the practice, just to hear how the alumni are watching Marci coach. I just watched her. I was like, man, I think I definitely want my kids to play here. I'd love to coach here with these guys, because it's one of the things I very much respected. And so it's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on. I thought it'd be a great first interview. So with that,
appreciate it.
What is that, just kind of your overall philosophy of coaching as you get these young women into your program? And, you could go in, and you've won Big 12 championships. You've had a lot of success in your tenure there. You could go in and be all about winning, and let's just do what we got to do to win games at all costs. Or you can have another philosophy, which, I'm kind of leading you a little bit here, but I know, because I know what your philosophy is, but can you share that philosophy that you have as you coach these young women?
Well, it's always been about the player first, and we want to recruit the right people into this environment that can buy into an entire culture. We don't want a me culture. We don't want necessarily the superstar mentality where it's all about one player. But what role can each individual player play within a program and buy in, so that as a whole we can be just a fantastic team? And how can we, as a Christian program, as a Christian institution, how can we show God's light through what we do? How do we worship through how we play? And not everybody on my team is a Christian, and they don't have to be to come here. But I think when they come here, they see something a little bit different. And for the most part, people want to be part of that. And I think we've attracted some amazing young people to this program because of how we do things. But at the same time, we want to compete for championships, but we want to do it the right way. And at the end of the day, these young people will end their soccer career at some point. And I want to make sure that what they get here will impact them later, that it's not just about soccer, but it is more about who they can be as people in the community, and hopefully learn to serve God and love God while they do that.
Yeah. So with that, you have, really just, it's, as you said, kind of the whole person. Really, you're developing them as women to go out into the world, right? So there's that character integrity. What's that got to do with like identity and just the idea of what is your identity in?
Well, I think for so long, especially at this level, these kids have been driven for so long to be soccer players, to earn the scholarship, to be the best player on their team. For us, usually it's a club team. Some also play high school and they're the captains, and that's around school, around town. They're the elite soccer player, and that's becomes their identity. And the hard part is when they come to the next level, everyone's coming from that same place. So then it's super competitive. All the best players from their towns are coming together and competing against each other. And some people aren't the most talented anymore, right? So all of a sudden, being the best player is out the window, and it's okay. What am I really about? What am I really good at? What am I? So really trying to emphasize to these players that it's not about being a soccer player. I think it's a tool that helps us grow and helps us develop into the people that God wants us to be. But at the end of it all, you're not going to be known as just a soccer player, and helping people realize their identity through that and find character traits that maybe they didn't know they even had. The first time somebody sits the bench could be in college, and they realize what it means to be a supportive member of the team, as opposed to the leader on the field. They've got to be the leader off the field, and that can be a really tough transition for people. But I think it's our job as coaches to help them navigate that, not just navigate the best players on the field to help you win championships, but also navigate those players that are on the sidelines that are pushing a level of training. If the saying is you're only as good as your weakest link better be freaking strong. And for us, that's what we want to happen, is want to be strong in every position on and off the field, behind the scenes, in their apartments, in the locker room, and just to instill great qualities in these young women.
Absolutely. And that's something that, as we have been talking about these things, that reminds me really of when I was just out of law school. I went to clerk for a judge, and I had this opinion that I wrote, and I thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. I thought I was going to go to the Supreme Court. It was going to be the biggest decision they were going to have that year. And he sat me down and he looked at me and he says, Phil, he goes, here's the deal. You're used to being number one, or top of your class. You're used to being that best student, and that, that's really become part of your identity. And he says, but here's the deal. I'm here to teach you how to be a better lawyer. I'm here to teach you how to be a better person. That's part of my job. And that's how I see the coach's job, but really any leader's job. If your identity is in your position, your job, your whatever it is, you're missing out on really so much of who you are created to be, right? I mean, I think that there's that lesson. And is that something that you're seeing that come to fruition as your players leave the campus and are stopped playing soccer? Have they come back and talked to you about that, how that's impacted them?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the greatest things about, I think, being a college coach. I mean, our job is to transition young people from when they graduate high school, they think they're adults, leaving home for the first time, and transitioning during these 4 years to really make them ready for the real world and be an adult, ready to make adult decisions. And just the joy of doing this so long now, of seeing, what I still consider my kids, my young women who are now full adults, having children and leading families and leading businesses. A lot are in the healthcare industry, and of course during this COVID season, just seeing them lead communities and be, kind of the backbone of communities during this really an uncertain time from a medical standpoint has been really, really fulfilling. We have a saying here, faith, family, football. And our idea is, can faith and family stay priority? Football changes. Faith, family, job, faith, family, whatever that may be. But the football piece, at some point, your career's over. Kind of like being a Christian athlete. You want to be a Christian mom. You want to be a Christian dad. You want to be a Christian employer, employee. But same thing with faith, family, football. Faith is first. Your family is second. And then football, or whatever path you're in, comes third. And I think really the players really embrace that as they go into the real world of, hey, can your faith be priority number one, and filter everything through that? Take care of your family, and then those things filter into what it is God has called you to do.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that as you're talking about it, as we talk about on here, and we've talked about a lot, you use those things you've learned in all those different things to help those different areas to be stronger, right? And that's something. But to make sure you have your priorities straight, I think is what you're getting at there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got to prioritize, because you can get lost pretty easily. I mean, in your line of work and the folks that you deal with, that sometimes the hardest thing is getting people's priorities in order, because they want to be, for me, they want to win a Big 12 championship. They want to win a national championship. But if their other priorities aren't in line, they're going to trip over the little things and never get to that point. They're looking too far off into the distance, So we've got to, as leaders, we've got to narrow things down. Say, hey, these are the goals, absolutely. But let's focus on the things that are going to get us there and prioritize correctly. And I don't know what you've seen kind of Phil through your experience on some of that.
Yeah, I think that just the prioritization of life is critical, and to learn the lessons that you are learning from different areas, but to not just have those in a vacuum, right? To make sure that you're incorporating all areas as much as you can, but also that you are making sure you keep the main things, right? And so right. I think that's critical. So as you mentioned something earlier, talked about kind of the weakest link needs to be really strong, right? And you need to be able to have the different people on the team knowing their roles, but also, something that is a really important concept in leadership as well is the idea of leading from the middle, right? And so how do you train up your team to do that? First of all, what do you understand when I say that to mean? What does that look like on your team, and how do you train up the women to do that?
Well, I think it's so easy to take your best players, to make them captains, to put the leadership kind of onus on those folks. But I think as coaches, sometimes the most important piece to focus on are those kids in the middle. The kids that are kind of bringing the top in a little bit and bringing the bottom up a little bit and kind of gelling things together. They're kind of somewhat your quiet leaders. They're the ones that lead, in the locker room or back, at the apartments away from the field. They're the ones that socially are getting folks together to kind of put a real perspective on what we're really doing here. Because I think the elite of the elite can get lost in the clouds at times, right? Keeping perspective can be tough. And then the ones that are not getting the playing time they feel like they deserve, so to speak, or that they expected when they got in can trickle off and fall off a bit. So the ones that are in the middle, I think, are very important. That they're kind of the glue to it, right? They're bringing things together, and I think helping lead those kids can really, and focus on those kids can really be very impactful on your program. And I think as leaders, we can't gravitate towards the top because sometimes those kids can take care of themselves. But if we can focus on some of the other parts that need the most attention, I think you serve your program. I think you serve your players or your employees or whatever it is. I think you serve it better, because sometimes those are the ones that don't feel like they're getting the attention. And they're the ones that can really impact your program the most. Because as we know, negativity is like a cancer. It can spread very quickly. And the quickest ones to go to negativity are the ones that they don't know. It's human nature to not know something, and then you fill that void in your mind with negativity. So the ones that don't know, the ones you're not speaking to, are filling their gaps in their minds with all these negative ideas. So as leaders, as coaches, we've got to make sure we're filling those gaps for them the proper way. And I think that just spreads through your culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's so important. It was so cool. I was talking on this idea with a friend of mine from high school who played soccer. She played at D1 level. And she was saying, she goes, yeah, I'm not a leader in my organization technically, but I feel like I'm the center midfielder in that organization. I feel like I'm passing things off to people. I'm kind of really keeping things organized and being that, not controlling things, but really being able to keep things in order and passing when necessary, and really just kind of being that field general. As those of us who play soccer know that idea, right? That idea that you need that person to kind of that six, holding midfielder, to be able to just play that role of holding down the fort, but also being able to put that pass where it needs to be, and being in these different positions to kind of ward off the issues. And so I think also with that idea, it's really important, as you said, for the morale, right? When everyone, the reality is, a leadership principle that I talk to people all the time about is you are leading somebody. Whether you know it or not, everybody is leading somebody. I tell that to my 9-year-old son. You are leading people. You are influential. Because again, leadership is not position. Leadership is influence, right?
Yeah.
And so you will influence. If you're a negative Nelly and you're on that field and you're just being negative all the time, that's going to bring people down. If you're really positive, that's going to bring people. Those things are contagious, right? So
yeah, and you hit it, Phil. That influence. We talk about that here all the time. That leadership is influence. It's not the title. It's not you're the captain. It's influence, and everybody has. We always say you're either giving or taking away. There's really no middle ground. If you find yourself in the middle, you're probably influencing in a negative direction. But influence is, I think, an absolute best way to describe leadership is influence. And how are you using your influence to make your team and teammates better?
yeah, and that leads into another thing I wanted to talk with you about, and that's really, you've alluded to it a couple times in this already in this interview, just the idea of culture, the idea of the chemistry on the team. There's a Peter Drucker quote that I've heard on other podcasts, I've heard all over the place, and I've read it several times as well, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And the idea that sometimes our best, quote unquote, most talented teams don't have the most success on the field. So talk to me about that and how you've seen that play out in your teams.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I've learned a ton about this from Marci, from my wife. She's just an incredible leader of culture, because that was kind of the role that she played through her career. I mean, she was a top player, All-American national team player, but she would pride herself on being just a great teammate and knowing the different roles within a team and within a culture. And I think that if you can get your culture right, and you can put a vision out there, a mission. What is our vision? Well, your goals are winning championships, but that's not your mission and that's not your vision. And you kind of have to put that out there as to what kind of team we want to be. And if you can get complete buy-in, you absolutely can be better as a whole than if you just had a couple of stud athletes. I think you and I spoke briefly the other day about early on in our culture here, we were rebuilding. This program hadn't had a winning season in 10 years before we got here. And the culture was not great. We come in and say, hey, what do you want to be? What kind of team do you want to be? And the girls would say, well, we know what we don't want to be. We want to win. We say, well, you may not like how we do this, but we're going to go after it, and it'll be hard. And their buy-in immediately was just incredible. We had freshmen coming in playing over seniors. It was like, hey, this is what you wanted. Are these girls better than you? Are they more talented? Yeah, coach, they are. I think this is what we need to do. And just their buy-in was incredible, to where you get to 2012, and player for player, we had no business winning a Big 12 championship. Player for player, we had no business getting to the Sweet 16 and taking North Carolina to penalty kicks. No business, player for player. But culturally, I think we had the best program in the country, just because the buy-in there from top to bottom, everybody was on the same page. We knew what we wanted to be about. We knew what we wanted people to see when they looked at us. And that's been continuous, not through the best years, but you're not always going to have success, but you're so much more capable of being a better team when everybody's on the same culture train than not. Early on, we couldn't take on a top kid who had a bad attitude, because the attitude would overweigh the culture. Right. Now we're at a point where our culture could probably take on a kid that maybe doesn't have the best attitude, because the culture is greater than a single player. So right. I think establishing culture early on, maybe taking your nod because of it, is so important. It is about the long game, which can be tough in our industry because we are results driven. But we really felt, Marci and I just felt from the very beginning, that we were going to do it a certain way, and live by the sword, die by the sword kind of thing. But we felt like God honored that, because it was what we felt like we were supposed to do. And it's a way more fun environment to be around also as a coach.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, I think that the next obvious question, at least for me, it might not be obvious to people out there, but in my head, and I'm the one asking the question, so I get to ask it.
You get to lead that.
That's exactly right. I can, even if you weren't thinking it, now you will be. So the idea, just recruiting. So obviously something that all leaders are having to do, if you grow at all, is to recruit new people. So with that come a few issues, right? You have the idea of recruiting the people for that culture. So you have the idea of, a virus, if it's strong enough, could overcome the strongest culture too, right? And, it just takes one to kind of feed into those other things. As we said, it's contagious. We know about viruses nowadays, unfortunately.
Yes.
But the other idea though, is just the onboarding process. So can you kind of speak to just that recruiting process that you do regularly? Obviously, it's a big part of what you're doing, and you're continually bringing new people in to the program. In fact, you have 14 freshmen this year, 8 of whom are starting, right? And to watch, the game last Friday night anyway, you played the number 4 team in the country. It held them to a tie, almost won in the second overtime, shot off the crossbar. So you had quite the game there. But the idea of, you could see even on the field that buy-in to it. So which that to me kind of shows me there is a quick onboarding, because you're in the 4th game of the season. Is that about right?
Yeah.
So that's a quick
onboarding.
So
Well, I think once you've established culture, as a coach, you're not hands off, but you hope to say, as my pastor used to say, you just keep them out of the ditches, keep them on the road. You're not driving the car, but maybe just keeping them out of the ditches. Your veterans are leading it at this point, and coming your culture being disseminated from within your culture is way better than it just coming out of the quote unquote leader or coach's mouth all the time, right? It's kind of like you tell your kid to do something 6 or 7 times, they don't get it. They go to their coach, says the same thing, and he's like, "Oh yeah, why wouldn't I do it that way?" And like, I've said it 100 times to you, why don't you do it? So same thing with your own team. But once you establish your culture, you have buy-in from your older players. Onboarding the new kids is so much easier when your older players, your veterans, your leaders within your program are the ones really setting the tone. This is how we do things. For us, we just encourage our older players to wrap their arms around these young kids, because the sooner they are, woven into what we're doing, the better we're going to be, and the faster we're going to get there. The more it's, hey, you're the new kid, prove yourself. Like, we'll talk to you when you've, earned your keep, sort of thing, just sets you back. And these kids realize, especially once they become juniors and seniors, their career is almost over. We don't have time to spend a couple of years getting these kids onboarded. So I'm just really proud of our veterans for what they've been able to do with these 14 dynamic, unique personalities that have come in. They're over. I mean, we say 14, but let's put that in perspective. That is 50% of my team.
Right.
It's not 14 out of 60. It's 14 out of 29. And so it's quite a lot of kids, and it can be a lot of influence. But once you've established your culture, it's easier to bring in that number of kids, and you're doing your due diligence, right? I mean, you're not just picking up any kid off the street. You're talking to coaches, you're meeting parents, you're meeting families, you're meeting the kid, you're spending time with them. And I think just the idea of, recruiting of, hey, you've got customers and employees, right? When we're recruiting customers. We're trying to sell the idea of Baylor University. We're trying to sell the idea of our culture and how we do things. And then when you get them on, they're still customers through their process, because they can really take off at any point if they're not happy, or you've sold them a bill of goods, right? This is what we're about. And they show up and they're like, hey, this isn't what I bought into. So you got to be true to your word. But then when they're here, they are kind of employees too. And you have to treat them the right way as employees, but hold them to a standard so that they can perform and take on that quote unquote burden of continuing that culture, right? Hey, you came here for a reason. Mm-hmm. Now that's on you to continue to push that culture and build it in what we can do to even be better. So that idea of customers, employees, as my players, I see them as both from at least from a business standpoint. I see them as customers and employees, and navigating what are they in that moment can be tricky at times.
Yeah, and that's something you talked about during one of our conversations that really stuck to me, was the idea of that customer and employee relationship kind of idea, to put it into obviously business terms, which is what we're doing here, right? To have that intersection. And that idea of that consumer culture that has just seeped into virtually everything in our country and probably our world, is just this idea of, there's all these different options. And I think with the internet, people are seeing all those options more and more and more. And with the way the club system in soccer has gone, with the way the different things in pretty much all businesses have gone, you have options galore, right? To be able to go to. And maybe not if you're looking for a full scholarship or a partial scholarship or whatever, but you do have a lot of options. So with that, from the customer standpoint, I remember, when I was sitting in your office with my daughter, you were, you sold a pretty cool, pretty amazing thing. I mean, and I mean, that's what you were selling, right? And it was, and then I went and watched the practice, and it was consistent, right? So there's that side of it. And you kind of have that hire, slow, fire, fast, which you mentioned. The recruiting process isn't something where you just say, hey, you look good on the 2-minute video, so come my way. No, you obviously have that kind of slower hiring. But when it goes kind of bad, right? So let's say there's a virus. So let's say that, as an employee, there's sometimes you have to fire, right? What does that look like in the context of your team?
Well, a couple things. I mean, and first off, I think we've got to hit on the fact that, with our social media world we're in too, everything else looks better, right? So not just kids, all of us run the risk of not pushing through hard things and just getting out of it because it looks easier somewhere else or looks better somewhere else, or people are just telling you their great story, their best day, their best moment. And that's all you're seeing. So we're missing an opportunity to really teach these young people how to push through hard things and holding them accountable to things. But there are times where you do get a virus, and I think you have to navigate as a coach. Two things for me that I think of, or maybe a few things. But one is what's in the best interest. If we're talking about people first, and if that's my philosophy, I've got to think, okay, what's in the best interest of this young person? Is it to cut them loose? Which isn't really very easy to do anyway nowadays, or is it to try to teach them something through this and help guide them through this? And then if you pick if you're guiding them through something, how long do you do that to where it then becomes, okay, at what point does this affect the other 28 kids on the team in a negative way? So navigating those two things can be very difficult. And to be just transparent with you, I'm very slow to fire, sometimes too slow, but at least I've been told. But I've just seen some amazing things happen with young people when you can, one, if you buy in and they buy in, some amazing things can happen. Now what I'm learning is that I'm very willing to buy in, but I've also learned there's certain people that are not willing to buy in on their side. Big talk, no action. And that's the moment where you realize, okay, it may be best for you to find another place. So I think that's a difficult thing because I think, while you want to win championships and you want to build a strong culture, sometimes the strongest culture is built by those kids that fought through something, have now come to the other side of it and are like, oh, this is awesome. But the kids that don't click into that are the same ones that are like, oh man, they are the virus. So navigating that is extremely difficult, but it's definitely something that we're doing, yearly. It doesn't, that's not all, roses here. There are kids it doesn't work out for. And I've seen kids go off and have great careers other places. And I've seen kids who've gone off and their troubles follow them. So, and I think I mentioned to you the other day, we've had a lot of successful kids come through this program. The ones that keep me up at night are the one or two or three that you feel like you missed. Those are the ones that keep you up at night.
Yeah, definitely. No, and that's life, right? I mean, I think that is something that you've said a few things here. One of them reminds me of actually my law school days, the idea of the culture. And it goes into the last two answers you gave. One is the culture is so strong because the leadership instills it in the law school example, the students, in the team example, into the team. But there was a violation of a rule, and the school didn't do anything about it. The class did. The class said, that's not how we act here. We're going to give you one more chance. We're giving you grace, but if you do it again, we don't accept that here. And it was, and I imagine a lot of that's going on your team too. There's that self-enforcement, like, hey, that's not who we are as Baylor soccer. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are things that I'll hear about months, years down the road that I never knew happened. And there's a part of me who's like, man, I wish I'd known that. But the reality is I'm glad I never knew about it because the culture itself took care of a problem that had they not addressed it, I would have had to address it. And by the time I would have found out about it, it would have been so blown up that maybe we couldn't have done a lot about it, or it would have had some pretty bad ramifications. So I love the stories and love hearing things where the team itself is navigating consequences for actions, because there have to be standards for a culture.
Absolutely. So a couple more things as we wind this up. The first thing is something that Ryan and I talked about in the first episode, just the idea of really studying and understanding our players and the different personalities. And as a coach, to be able to understand each personality so you know how to really coach them individually as well as corporately. But also for the coaching staff, the importance of understanding the personalities of the coaching staff and who does what in the coaching staff. And so can you speak to that, how that plays out in your program?
Yeah, I think it's very easy as a coach, as a leader, to take your personality and put that on everybody else and expect everybody else to understand how you understand, to communicate how you communicate. And I think if you do that, you're setting yourself up to fail very quickly. Those of us that are married and have children, I think we know very quickly that even within your own household, that's something that you learn is, the best way to have a strong household is be able to communicate properly with your spouse and with your children. And even though your children are born of you and your wife, their personalities can be totally different from you. Like, where did you come from? You're not like me or your mom, So that helps you navigate it a bit. But I think within your program, having a staff that is not a cookie cutter of yourself, because with a team of 30, 32, whatever it may be on a year, you may have one or two that relate directly with you. And you hope that a few of them relate directly with the other staff members, whether it's assistant coaches or director of operations or athletic trainer, somebody that then connects directly back to you as the head coach or leader to help disseminate information properly to get the best out of everybody. And being able to have an open ear to people that don't communicate how you do is huge for a culture. Everybody needs to feel like they're being heard. Everybody needs to feel like they have an opportunity. But if we're not able to communicate, which is talking and listening, then you don't have an opportunity to be very successful as a program or as a team or as a business. So I think the cookie cutter idea is not a successful one when it comes to personalities.
Absolutely. And I was reading the Alex Ferguson autobiography and him talking about how he didn't become the manager who he was until he realized he couldn't be both the trainer and the manager, and
Right.
that he really needed to listen more as the manager. And I think a lot of that has to do with the personalities of the coaches and the managers as well, because of, their how they act and interact and whether they're detail oriented or people focused, things like that really impact that. Have you seen that in your staff?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think he even says something in one of his books about how if he's not working on his team every day, he's setting them up for failure. That with all the success in the world that he's had, even with that team, he was walking in every day knowing that something new was going to happen. He had to be working on it every day. And I think with even in our own staff, when you find yourself getting comfortable, get worried, get scared, because those are the moments that things start to fall. And I know even in my own career, a number of years ago, I had to reassess everything that I was doing. It didn't mean firing people; it meant really firing myself and saying, "Hey, you're getting way too comfortable. You need to step it up and hold yourself more accountable, so that you can then hold staff and players more accountable." But it's a constant thing. I think somebody said that something about culture being a behavior, not a belief. Culture is not a belief; it's a behavior. So behavior is something you're constantly acting on. You're constantly having to adjust it and work on it, and holding your staff accountable to that too is extremely important. Hey, are you meeting with a couple of kids that I really can't connect to because we need that kid connected? So yeah, that constant reminder is so important to stay engaged with your culture as a behavior.
Absolutely. And there's so many things that I even saw, just a little exposure I had to your program that back that up. So don't have time to get into that today, but there are two more questions. One is, you alluded to the differences of your children. And I agree. 5 kids that I have, they're all totally different personalities. And, one is like my mini me. One is probably close to my wife's mini me, but the other ones, man, it's like, what is going on here? Who are these kids? But even the mini me's, we butt heads probably more than anything, right? So, but what are I really want to be able to have people take the things we're talking about here and apply them into their lives. So some of the people listening are parents like you and me are, and that I am. And so what are a couple things, maybe just one thing, that you have learned playing or coaching soccer that you and Marci use in your parenting, that you use in your marriage? What are some of those things you like? For instance, in my house, we often will say the retaliator gets the red. right? So, right.
Straight off the pitch into the house. I like
That's
that.
exactly right.
Yeah.
My wife and I we're both soccer players too. So, and our kids are too. So they get that, right? So there's things like that you might be able to do. But give me an example of something that you use that people might be able to take.
Well, first and foremost, I don't care what job or industry you're in, your number one team is your team in your house, your family. So whatever sacrifice you have to make to develop your culture within your walls of your home, do it. If it sacrifices your job and your culture within your industry, it's 100% worth it. We've taken some big chances over our career in the same regard, and have seen nothing but blessing within our household because of it. But I think that the game within our household, if you knew Marci as a player, she's one of the most physically tough players that played. We talk a lot about getting stuck in, and if you're going to go into things lightly, you're more likely to get hurt. So go in hard, and that doesn't mean going mean. It just means be confident in what you're doing. Give your best at all times, because then no one can question your effort. Attitude and effort always are going to supersede talent. And so those are some little things I think that we try to embed. But culture, for sure, a mission and vision for our family, the things that are going to be non-negotiables within our household, as far as attitudes or talking back or disrespect, all play into our team. One thing that definitely overlaps is I tell my players and my kids, if you've done something wrong, tell me, because the punishment for being wrong, doing something incorrectly or wrong, will be way less than if I find out you lied about it.
That's right.
So honesty and truth and integrity will be number one in anything that we want to be about.
I love that. I love all those. I'm going to use that stuck in thing too, because we all know most of our, like the vast majority of injuries come when you're not going all in, right?
Yeah.
And so I love that. And that is
sometimes you can make up for a mistake by going all in. A bad touch is only a bad touch if you're not willing to make up the extra steps to get on that bad touch. So
that's right.
Go in and go in hard. And sometimes you make a wrong decision, a right decision.
A couple of my kids will love that you just said a bad touch can be remedied. So, the last question, and the first interview here, we may be changing this last question, but I like having,
especially if I totally botch it, you can totally change it, right?
I can always edit that out too. So, yeah. But what book, kind of movie, podcast that, maybe you've watched in a documentary that is really, that you've used kind of most in your coaching that people can also use to help you understand how to lead others with excellence?
Well, a couple of things. Oswald Chambers' Utmost for His Highest has been a go-to for me and Marci for our entire coaching career. There's just so many great nuggets in there about leadership, about how God manages things, how to navigate people, how to lead people. John Maxwell, the 21 Most Powerful Minutes in Leadership, is a great daily devotional about leadership. There's a new podcast that actually, to promote maybe a friend of mine, it's called Chasing What Matters. And he and his son are working on this together, bringing in great Christian leaders. It's just an amazing podcast that I've really gotten a lot out of the last month that they've been up. And then one other person I'll shout out to is Tim Elmore. I think he does a great job helping navigate the different generations and how they are to be led. His Habitudes program are things that I kind of go back to now and again. And then, sorry, this is a long one. What's your one thing? I don't have one.
That's
all
right.
Any book from any professional coach, whether it's, the soccer or football coaches, to Dan Gable, who's one of the greatest wrestling coaches of all time. Just nuggets from coaches that are more wise and more experienced than me is where I get some of my greatest nuggets of truth.
I love that. No, you can't have enough resources for folks out there, because different people like different things, different mediums as well. And I tend to get different things from different areas. And so definitely appreciate those. I've read a few of them. Haven't read all of them. Of course, when you say autobiographies of any coach, I definitely haven't read all of those. But
well, Ferguson is a great one.
That was a fantastic,
great stuff in there.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for just the wisdom that you shared today. I thank you for being consistent too, because, like I said, I've watched you, from whether it's on TV, but also there in Baylor, or in Waco at Baylor. And I just thank you for being a good man that's a model for so many, and are leading some these women, as well as, we didn't talk a lot about your camps, but the young kids as well, with you and Marci and what you're doing. And I'm just very grateful that I've been able to become a friend. So thanks a lot, Paul.
Absolutely. Well, Phil, thanks a lot for all you're doing, not only for the game, but just for the kingdom. And I just appreciate getting to know you over the last number of years, and looking forward to where this goes. This podcast, it can only go up from here, no doubt about it. So I appreciate you having me on.
It's another leadership principle. You set the bar low, you can always hit it, right? So it's actually not a leadership principle, folks. That was a joke, just to be clear. Sometimes jokes don't go well over podcasts, but that was. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for this first episode that we were able to have. We're very grateful that you chose to take some time to download this episode and listen to our conversation. If you liked it, which I hope you did, I hope that you will be able to share it with your friends on social media, that you will go and rate and review it at Apple Podcasts. And I just hope that, most importantly, I hope that you're using kind of what you're learning here, what you learned on the first episode after, before this, and what you'll learn in the future, as well as maybe reading all these books that Paul was talking about. You'll take it and use it to help you become a leader in every area of your life. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.